next year that the lessons from this year can be incorporated in so you have a more productive board. First thing you need to do with respect to refocusing is, and I know you're working on this and it's very important to how this board should work, is the policies. We have policies and procedures dictated all the way down from the Department of Defense to the local level of how this board should operate, what's its scope of responsibilities, and that should drive what we do. Why we're dysfunctional, we have those in writing, but throughout this year, we've had superintendent and other folks tell us those policies have been superseded, nothing in writing. That's not how DOD works, and DOD is the first part of DODEA. So if we don't have it in writing, it doesn't exist. We need to operate within our procedures. We need to operate within the scope of our responsibility to make sure those things that we're supposed to be doing, we're doing. The other thing on procedures, we need to come up with procedures to do that. And I'm going to talk about meetings under those procedures. We have these board meetings once a month. They meet for an hour, hour and a half. Love to see the kids do their thing. That's great. I go to a lot of the school events, both as a parent and board member. I would tell everybody on the board, please do that. With the limited amount of time this board has to complete its work, we need to focus on that time to complete our work. If we would like to have students present things, we can schedule another time. Or we can do working group meetings like we did with the dress code or other type meetings in executive within the policies and procedures. So we need to capitalize on the time available to make sure we can focus on things. The other thing is roles. We have 4 board members and a president. I'll tell you one thing a president does not do is advocate the role of the board. My understanding through emails, that's what this current president has done. Advocated our role and our authority to the superintendent. I disagree with that, and I'm making it public that I disagree with it. Please take notes, or I'll give you these notes afterwards. You need to fix that next year. That's something the board president should not do. I've talked about meetings, working group, executive, being productive, and time available. That's kind of the context that we do our business. We didn't do that very well this year. And the reason I'm bringing this all out, because I put a lot of time and energy to being a board member, being a functional board member, and we really have achieved nothing. And it kind of irks me. I think we've lost an opportunity. And I'm hoping the 2 remaining ones can fix that next year. Relationship with the superintendent. Truthfully, not a very good relationship. And Frank, you may take exception to this, but my belief is that the superintendent is not interested in a board who is active in the process and is actively trying to represent the parents that they represent. One reason I ran for the board last year, when I sat through board meeting last year, I saw the way the board interacted with the parents, the way the superintendent acted with the parents, and I was appalled. That's not the way we interact with the populations the board was elected to represent. Doesn't work that way. I ran for the board, got elected, I tried to change that this year. I think with respect to the board and its interaction with the parents has been a positive. I'm not getting the same feeling from the superintendent. That's my thoughts. The other part is the relationship with our board president. Choose wisely next year. There's a lot of email traffic that they don't see in the stands. That's only between us. That shows that we have a very big divide between the way we believe the board president is representing this board and what the board wants to do. You need to fix that. Okay? And again, why do I bring this all out specifically in a public forum? One is, we tried to do this kind of thing in a private forum. That got poo-pooed. That said, not doing it. Okay, so we're out in public. We need to fix these things. When Frank discusses how several of our things are contentious and frustrating, I will tell you why they're frustrating and contentious. The individuals we're here to support, the board, they don't feel like they're being heard. That's why they're frustrated, and that's why it's contentious. Now I'll move on to the, and I'm going to use the dress code process as a symptom of this broader problem I'm talking about with respect to the relationship between the parents, the board, superintendent, and the parents. Dress code, very contentious. Truthfully, throughout the process, I never tried to sway it one way or another. I believe the representative group that we had to get together would come up with a solution. So from my point, it's not contentious. I don't have an emotional bone in that fight. Back in October, as we were fighting amongst ourselves to get this thing pushed forward, I offered up the recommendation that we have a representative working group. composed of a school board representative elected by the school board who was elected by the parents. Second, the administrator. Miss Yolanda, you were there. Miss Teresa was there. We had the principals of both schools there. We had Laurel was there. We had the teachers union. We had student councils from both schools that were involved. People elected by their student body. We had PTO representation there. People who represent the teachers and the parents. We had EFMP parent representation. We also had other students and parents there. So in my mind, that's pretty representative of the effective populations with respect to the dress code. All elected by the people they represent. Okay. We had several meetings. We went through a process. We tested those alternatives against certain criteria. We came up with a recommendation, very representative process. The outcome, we had a recommendation which the board approved and presented to the superintendent. Now, here's where I take exception. That process was discussed back in October. You agreed to it. However, when the results was presented to the superintendent, that very process that's representative of the population and agreed to was basically shot down as non-representative. That's where I take exception. One is pre-agreed to. Second is, I grew up in America where that's representative government. We teach our kids to representative through student councils, and that's how we run our schools. Yet when it comes down to decisions, the superintendent tells us that's not the way to do things. That's where I have some exception with the process. And I think that's symptomatic of the whole relationship between the parents, administration, though I'm not speaking for you guys, but I am in a sense, and the school board with the superintendent. So from my perspective, that's the lesson that you two guys next year need to work on, and hopefully can grow into a more productive session over the year for the school board and the folks you represent. That's all I have to say about that.
I have some comments as well. Unfortunately, Jim just took about 2/3 of my presentation. Mine was geared more towards the community out there because I want you all to know that there's a lot you haven't seen that's been happening behind the scenes. We've been working very hard to get your voices heard, and we've come up against quite a lot of stonewalling, frankly. So I want to add on a little bit to what Mr. Stevenson had to say, and I want to also say for the record that I concur wholeheartedly with everything that he has just said, and I support him 100%. And hopefully that the next board next year will adhere to the law, the federal law that is given to us at school board training, that we are bound to abide by. These are our duties and responsibilities to you, the community, not to anyone else in this room. So my prayer for this board next year is that this law will be upheld, and that the board will be able to function as it's intended to function with the law. Excuse me, with the law. This issue about the working group. Some of you may know I took exception with the way it was handled in terms of the superintendent's response to it. And Jim already brought up the point that it was agreed to ahead of time. I have email in front of me, Dr. Calvano's words. I don't know that we need to go into all of it, but I want to make 2 points. 2 things that he said to us at the beginning of the year back in October when we, I don't know if you all remember, some of you may have been here, when this board unanimously passed a motion to recommend spirit wear to be allowed to be worn at any time during the school week. It was something that the parents had definitely lobbied us for heavily. It was something that I felt strongly about was good for the school, good for school spirit. We passed a motion, we made a recommendation, the recommendation was denied. As part of that denial, the superintendent sent out these words to the board, and I want you to hear them, and I want you to hear them closely, and I want this to be on the record. Superintendent's words, not mine. I have no inclination to make decisions about the dress code in piecemeal fashion. That's point 1. Point 2, I have no inclination to make dress code decisions based on a selective sampling process, nor do I support such actions which exclude school board members. I expect all secondary staff, students, and parents who have dependent attending one or both of our secondary schools to have an opportunity to respond to a questionnaire mutually agreed upon by us, which is the process used by all previous school board members and the superintendent. The data would then be analyzed by us and hopefully arrive at consensus. And yet, in his response to the school board and their proposed revisions to the dress code, Dr. Calvano has done exactly what he told the board he had no inclination to do. He has incorporated only 2 of the recommended changes in piecemeal fashion: denim, clothing, and a trial period. In addition to that, he plans to survey the staff, students, and parents at the end of the trial period. To my knowledge, there has been no effort made to include the board in this process or to develop a questionnaire that is mutually agreed upon. His words, not mine, by us. After the Spirit Wear decision was rendered, Mr. Stevenson reached out to Dr. Calvano in an effort to find some common ground on how to proceed with the dress code. Mr. Stevenson reiterated the board's discussion with the superintendent about the possibility of assembling a working group to develop a comprehensive proposal rather than a piecemeal approach. The following email exchange demonstrates Dr. Calvano's position on the working group at that time. Mr. Stevenson said, "I believe the majority of the board yesterday came to the agreement and understanding that a piecemeal approach is not the optimal approach. The best way forward to address this issue is the formation of a representative working group of all stakeholders to analyze, discuss, and formulate a comprehensive, coherent recommendation to you on the dress code." Dr. Calvano replied, "I fully concur. You expressed this thought yesterday, to which I responded in part, amen." Amen. Pretty high praise. "I do hope all board members have the same view." Mr. Stevenson responded, or Mr. Stevenson further said, "I believe the above answers your points on why you intend to disapprove yesterday's motion," still talking about Spirit Wear, "and perhaps offers another course of action," the other course of action being the working group. Then Jim says to the rest of the board, I believe we ended yesterday's meeting on a positive note, moving forward via a working group toward a final recommendation. Let's keep the momentum going." Dr. Calvano's response to that. Again, I fully concur. A working group is fine from my point of view. The board must decide if indeed this is going to be the way forward. The board did decide. In taking Dr. Calvano's guidance, the board moved forward with a working group. Now, Dr. Calvano, it was clear to every member of the board, I want to make this clear. It was clear to every member of the board at that time that the dress code working group was a mutually agreed upon course of action. There was no mention at that time of a requirement to conduct a survey in addition to the working group. None whatsoever. It's not in the email traffic. Dr. Calvano also stated in his response that the proposed dress code resulted in minimal input from secondary staff, students, and their parents. I take exception to this. On the contrary, the working group was comprised of a group of highly qualified administrators, 2 administrators, which, by the way, I want to go on the record to say that I respect both of them greatly. And I respect their experience in the building, and I know that they deal with this dress code every day. So I don't feel like we could have had 2 more qualified administrators in that working group in order to advise that group on the way forward. I don't think you could have done that with a survey, not by any stretch of the imagination. The experience that those 2 ladies brought to that group cannot be duplicated, and it needs to be stressed. In addition to the 2 highly qualified administrators, there were students from both schools, to include members of the student council, the FKEA president representing staff from both schools. And by the way, Laurel also indicated that she had spoken with teachers from both schools and gotten their input when she showed up to the board. So she was there as their bona fide representative. It's not as if none of them had a say in it. They all had a say. In addition to that, there were PTO presidents from both schools, and a parent representing exceptional family members, and also parents with students from both schools, which has already been mentioned by Jim. Dr. Calvano claims with regard to the current dress code that all changes that have occurred included input from all secondary staff, students, and their parents vis-a-vis questionnaires. He also claims that input factored heavily into subsequent dress code changes. So basically, he's putting a lot of emphasis on this questionnaire process. Some of you may recall at the beginning of the year that I ran an informal survey on SurveyMonkey and was roundly criticized for basically going rogue against the board and doing something on my own. It was only intended to gather information, to get your concerns from the community and bring it back to the board. No one was going to vote on anything that came out of that survey. And yet, it was not a process that could have been followed. So, when the board was considering this process earlier in the year and I asked for copies of the previous questionnaires that were sent out, I was informed that there was nothing on file. 15 years of this time-tested process that Dr. Calvano has so much faith in, not one shred of data is on file regarding the process or the outcomes. Nothing. 15 years. Not one questionnaire from the past 15 years of surveys was saved for future analysis. Not one supporting document exists, to my knowledge, right now to validate this process as the gold standard for community participation. Nothing. We have been presented with nothing. I wonder why. An internet search yielded an article published in the Gold Standard online, written by Jerry Leitzel. Interestingly, it was entitled, "Few Knox Parents Return Surveys to Change Dress Code." The article, dated October 27, 2010, went on to say that only 7.99% of the surveys were returned to Fort Knox High School, and just 30.8% of the surveys were returned to Scott Middle School. This survey information was used to make 8 changes to the dress code that year. 7.99% and 30% representation. This woefully underrepresented process is considered the way ahead. But when we put a group of professional administrators and teachers and students and board members and representatives of the community into a room that have gone out to their fellow community members and asked for their input, we have PTO presidents that have received input from their PTOs and from all the parents involved with that. We put all these people into a room. Probably no better way we could come up with the right answer for the dress code than what we did with this committee, in my humble opinion. And I got to tell you something. If 15 years of surveys, which we have no record of, which we have no idea how they were conducted, which we have no data from, if 15 years of surveys have produced a dress code that we have right now, that is literally a cobbled together Dr. Frankenstein version of the bold letter word no, tying everything together, a picture of punitive action. If that's the result of 15 years of these questionnaires, then I'm here to tell you those questionnaires are not the way ahead. We did it right this time. And we did it with the consent of the superintendent. He told us one thing and then he did another. Bait and switch. Bait and switch. And that has been the nature of our relationship all year long. I urge you in the community to understand that we on this board have done our level best to have your voices heard. And I urge you to not forget what has happened this year. And part of the reason I wanted to get this into the record is so whoever comes in next year can look back on what happened this year and say, all right, we tried that. A lot of people put a lot of good effort into this. And for what? Dismissal. Superintendent doesn't like the way I characterize that. But in my opinion, that's exactly what it is, and I'm entitled to an opinion. So please, those of you who are going to be here next year, get out there in your community. Make sure you get some people on this school board who are going to make your voices heard. And I'm telling you right now, I will promise you this much. I still have an opportunity to lay the groundwork so that next year's board will function properly as the way it should function. And I will do my level best to accomplish that before I leave here in May. And I will not do it alone because I will have the support of the board. On that note, I would like to make a motion to file a formal appeal up to Dr. Middlemiss, DOD DDES, in accordance with the DOD instruction. And I will be happy to sit down with any members of the board that want to sit down with me and draft a joint proposal, a joint response, and take it higher. And just so everyone knows, and I'm sorry to belabor you with the law, but I feel like I need to read this into the record because that's the environment that we operate in. Under the Department of Defense Instruction 1342.25, dated October 30th, 1996, which, by the way, according to the Office of General Counsel, is not outdated. It is still the law that governs this body. 5.2.3 says that the director, DOD DDES, shall determine when the actions of a school board conflict with an applicable statute, regulation, or other guidance, or when there is a conflict in the views of the school board and the superintendent. We have a conflict. When such conflicts occur, the director, DOD DDES, shall assist the superintendent and the school board in resolving them, or direct that such actions be discontinued. Such disapprovals must be in writing to the school board and the superintendent concerned and shall state the specific supporting reason or